This week we will be talking about the tremendous difference God can make in a person's life or in any circumstances when he chooses to do his work. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisseton, Illinois, with your thoughts for Monday. There is a small word in the English language called but. It is actually a conjunction that implies a sudden change in the direction of one's thoughts. It's really important to understand every word that follows it, especially if the phrase is, but God. And take, for example, the book of Romans. Paul wrote this epistle to a church that he had not planted, nor had he really preached the gospel message there. And even though he knew this was a body of believers, he wanted to make sure that they had heard the truth of God's gospel through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. He begins the book of Romans with some serious doctrinal teachings from the sinfulness of man, like Romans 3:23 that says, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Or Romans 3:10 that says, there is none righteous, no, not one. Then he reminds us in Romans chapter 5 and verse 6 that we are still without strength. Meaning, of course, we were lost in our sins. There was nothing we could do about it because we were so helpless. Then he says in Romans 5 and verse 8, but God demonstrates his own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We were sinners. We were so lost in our worldly and carnal way that we were actually hopeless. And not only that, we were helpless. Since we had no way of making ourselves better, we certainly couldn't become righteous and holy enough to be acceptable to a holy God on our own. So he says, but God. This is a purely merciful step taken by an omnipotent God who could have judged us for our sins and left us as a poor, lost, pitiful creature that's just controlled by Satan like a puppet. So what does this but God do for us? Well, he demonstrated his own love toward us. He decided to show us how much he loved his creation and each one of us individually too. You know, there are a lot of things that God shows us about himself on a daily basis. He shows us his faithfulness when the sun rises in the east every morning. He reminds us of his promises when the rain ends and this beautiful, colorful bow stretches across the sky to remind us of his covenant with Noah to never destroy the world again with water. The prophet reminds us during his lamentations, it is through the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. So God demonstrated his own love for us while we were still sinners. Have you ever had that person who has wronged you and you're still waiting for them to beg you for forgiveness so that, you can decide whether you really want to forgive them or not? While we were still sinners, in direct opposition against a holy God, he reached out and showed us his love and his kindness. And his demonstration was not a meaningless gesture of some questionable kindness. His love was when Christ died for us. He gave us his only begotten son. Now, but God turns the whole story around. From a helpless sinner in danger of judgment to a beloved child for whom the Father was willing to give his one and only Son to die a cruel death on the cross of Calvary. He turned the story around, and he turned us around too, from that forgotten one to that forgiven one when he showed us his love. And all things are hopeless, but God can show you his love.